Whom the Gods Fear, by Wdowski. Chapter 30. Glen, against the recommendations of Granite, Landru, and Hogan, decided to join Captain Mahan and the A-er-shwaaaa back down to the surface. He would accompany them to go to the regional overseer's compound. Glen would go with only the father, Specialist Stovall, and 2 Marines armed with pulse rifles. If needed, Captain Mahan would have the 2 shuttles on the ready with the rest of his Marines to come to their aid from their staging base at the homestead. Glen explained to Captain Mahan that it was Mahan's job to be the cavalry riding in to the rescue at the last minute. Captain Mahan was not amused by Glen's description of his role in the mission. He still insisted that he and his Marines should accompany him in force to the overseer's compound, with the shuttle pilots ready to pull them out at a moment's notice. Glen insisted that he will be fine with Wdowski's father and doubted greatly that Demi had armed any of the A-er-shwaaaa with the antimatter rifles. Glen assured Mahan that the 2 Marines with their pulse rifles would be more than enough protection. Mahan pointed out to Glen that one does not need an antimatter rifle to kill a man. A pointy stick stabbed into the right spot on the human body can accomplish the same thing, or even a rock to the head. Mahan was confident that the so-called overseer will have his own men armed with much more than pointy sticks and rocks. Wdowski's father, A-er-shwaaaa, confirmed what Captain Mahan was saying, that the regional overseer did have men, the A-er-shwaaaa, and that they were armed with steel blades that could decapitate a man in a single stroke. It seemed the A-er-shwaaaa were not as alien to violence and conflict as they humans first thought. They learned from A-er-shwaaaa the reason they had not seen any weapons before is that Demi had forbid the A-er-shwaaaa from carrying any weapons in public. Only the overseer's A-er-shwaaas were allowed to keep their weapons, but only within the overseer's compounds. Demi had declared it was for the A-er-shwaaa's own safety. Weapons had even been forbidden within the city walls. Glen felt Demi's decree was more likely for his own safety, not the safety of the A-er-shwaaaa. Captain Mahan was in agreement. It sounded to both of them that Demi had secured his position very nicely. The overseer's A-er-shwaaas were allowed to keep their weapons as long as they only used them to maintain the peace within the outlying regions. A-er-shwaaas themselves, armed or not, were forbidden from entering the gates of the capital city. When the regional overseers were to have audiences with Demi, they had to enter into the city alone. His A-er-shwaaas forced to wait outside. Mahan informed Glen that Captain Demi at least seemed to have a deep respect for the realistic trauma so-called antiquated steel weapons could inflict on the human body. They also learned from A-er-shwaaaa that Demi had already ordered all the overseers to rotate out of their home regions to different regions. It was decreed that they were to rotate every year to a different region and never to their home regions. Glen explained to Mahan it was an old Communist Party tactic to prevent provincial governors and military leaders from establishing loyalty power bases within the areas they governed, a way for the central government to better maintain and secure its authority. Glen realized the fact that the rotation of regional leaders, Demi having his pictures in the homes of the A-er-shwaaaa and his robots teaching the young, were all for the sole purpose of controlling the population and consolidating his position as their living god. Demi's actions are right out the playbook of most tyrants before him. Emperor Caligula, the living god of Rome, Hitler, the father of the fatherland, Joseph Stalin, the all-powerful, all-knowing leader of the motherland, the Kim dynasty of North Korea, Mao, the great helmsman of Red China, and later Xi Jinping's rise as a new Mao. Glen explained to the others. Demi is building a cult of personality around himself to justify his domination and making it sacrilege to challenge or question him. Mr. Yeager, if everything you are saying is true about Captain Demi, and if I remember my history at the Academy correctly, Demi will not hesitate to have you killed or imprisoned if you oppose his authority, responded Captain Mahan, now even more concerned with Glen trying to see Demi without him and his full squad of Marines. Specialist Stovall weighed in with his captain. Mr. Yeager, the more I talk to the A-er-shwaaaa about Captain Demi, it is apparent to me that you are correct. Glen thought deeply about what both men were saying. He could not help but agree with them. Yet he was not willing to risk so many more lives if the situation was as dangerous as he was beginning to think it was with Demi. He though also still agreed with Granite, and that they should not make a full assault on Demi without first confronting him and confirming that his worst suspicions of Demi were absolutely true. Due to his long friendship with Demi, Glen thought he owed him at least that much. Perhaps you are both right. Glen responded as both men seemed relieved with that Glen was addressing their concerns. I still think it is best I go without the Marine escort. There is no point in risking their lives. Specialist Stovall, I will not order you to accompany me. I have the translation software on my 4-armcom to assist me. I will keep an open link with you on my 4-armcom if I do run into any difficulty. I will not order the 2 Marines to escort me. I will only accept volunteers. Mr. Yeager, I want to accompany you. I am aware of the dangers of this mission. If you are willing to take those risks, so am I. Stovall immediately responded. I am going to still have 2 Marines accompany you, not only for your safety, but also for A-er-shwaaaa's and Specialist Stovall's. Captain Mahan insisted. All the Marines volunteered. Mahan chose his 2 best men for the assignment. Mahan then assured them all, we will be waiting on board both shuttles ready to charge in like the cavalry at any sign of trouble, including us losing our link with you. The men all climbed onto the back of A-er-shwaaaa's large 2-wheeled cart pulled by 2 horse-sized animals. The animals were pasty white like the A-er-shwaaaa. Their necks were twice as long as a horse's. They had 2 large eyes looking somewhat forward and 1 lesser eye in the rear of their heads. The 3rd small black eye of the animals, explained A-er-shwaaaa, could only sense movement and was not their primary form of vision. It did though give the animal an edge against a predator seeking up from behind them. The feet of the animal were similar to the wide feet of a camel, better suited for the open sand areas of the planet than the green lush rolling hills around the major cities. The animals could reach the galloping speed of a horse. When A-er-shwaaaa snapped his reins, they all felt an unexpected yank of the cart as the powerful animals pulled them up the dirt road towards the northern ridge. They had left at first light of the alien sun. By midday they entered a small town. Many A-er-shwaaaa were in the streets attending to their business, until one of the inhabitants spotted Glen and his men sitting in the back of the farmer's cart. The town came to a sudden halt as the A-er-shwaaaa townspeople prostrated themselves towards the cart where they had stood. Glen decided to step down from the cart. Stovall and the Marines followed his lead. Not the response I was expecting. Stovall said amazed how their mere presence had brought the whole town to a standstill. Demi has done a real number on them. Glen turned to A-er-shwaaaa, who was still sitting in the driver's seat of the cart, and asked him through his 4-armcom to please have the townspeople rise. A-er-shwaaaa did as Glen requested, shouting out to the townsfolk to rise. They all rose, but did not go on with their business. Instead, they just stood in their spots, heads lowered, softly chanting, "Dorwaa, Dorwaa." Glen looked at Stovall and the 2 Marines. This is ridiculous. Is better than them attacking us as alien monsters. One of the Marines spoke up. That is true. Glen had to concede. A-er-shwaaaa, please ask them to go with their daily business. We mean them no trouble. This time Stovall translated for Glen. Confused, the people stopped their chanting and raised their heads. They still did not go on with their business. A-er-shwaaaa repeated Stovall's request in A-er-shwaaaa. They still only stood there in awe as they examined from a distance the humans. Finally, a few of the braver males stepped in closer to Glen and the others in order to get a better look at the shorter, living gods. Both Marines nervously began to raise their pulse rifles. Glen gestured to them to lower their weapons, which they did. The A-er-shwaaaa, building up their courage, surrounded the humans cautiously. One male looked down directly into Glen's eyes. The alien spoke. Dorwaa, wa walmaras washwa A-er-shwaaaa. He then lowered his eyes, waiting for Glen to reply. Glen's 4-armcom and Stovall both interpreted it as, Lord, why honor us with your presence? Glen looking at the A-er-shwaaaa male that spoke to him and replied, as Stovall translated, we are here to see your overseer. We wish you all to just go on with your business. The A-er-shwaaaa male understanding lowered his head and responded, Ayaz Dorwaa. He then raised his head and turned to the townspeople and shouted at them. The townsfolk responded by stepping back and making way for Glen and his men to continue down the road. The crowd did not go on with their business. Instead, they shadowed the human party and allowed them to continue towards the overseer's compound in the center of the town. A-er-shwaaaa pulled his animals and cart, choosing to walk alongside Glen and his men. Do you think we are in any danger? Asked one of the Marines as he watched the A-er-shwaaaa that moved with them on both their flanks and from behind. The alien numbers growing as they ventured deeper into the town. I think we are safe, Marine. Glen responded. If they were going to mob us, they would have already. The question is how these Amphithars will respond to us. Approaching the compound, the crowd lined the way to the front gate that blocked their progress. The large wooden doors had strong steel braces reinforcing their heavy planks. Atop the wall was an A-er-shwaaaa male in a lime green and bright orange tunic that had printed on it the face of some sort of alien animal with snarling teeth and yellow eyes. Under the tunic, the alien wore triangle links of steel forming chain mail. He shouted down to his unseen comrades behind the wall. Glen and his party could hear feet rushing to the gate and being unbolted. The heavy doors swung inward, revealing a courtyard with a tranquil and alluring fountain in its center. The fountain was encircled with benches and alien flowers of bright orange, petals atop of lime green stems with broad leaves. Glen at least now understood the clashing color scheme of the tunics. Luckily, there was no sign in the courtyard of the fierce animal on the soldier's tunic. A-er-shwaaaa told them that he would wait outside the compound with the animals and the cart. He explained that his status was too low to enter the compound. Glen at first was repulsed by A-er-shwaaa's reason for not wanting to enter with them, yet he could see the genuine fear in his face over the thought of entering an overseer's compound. Glen had Stovall thank him for bringing them so far, and that they should be able to handle the rest on their own. He asked A-er-shwaaaa to return to his farm and wait for their return. A-er-shwaaaa climbed back atop his cart, picked up the reins, and turned his animals around. A-er-shwaaaa safety and success. Stovall translated for Glen. A-er-shwaaaa, Glen wished A-er-shwaaaa. Glen turned back to the open gate before them as A-er-shwaaaa rode off with his cart and animals back the way they had come. The four men cautiously entered the gateway. Once inside the compound, the gates were swung closed behind them, and they found themselves flanked on both sides by columns of 10 Amphithars warriors deep. The alien soldiers stood tall at attention with large, polished wood poles tipped with embedded sharp steel blades that ran halfway down the lengths of the 2.5-meter-long pikes. The intimidating weapons glistened in the midday sun. The Amphithars did not flinch in the dry, warm air as Glen's party walked past row after row towards the fountain in the center. "Those blades look razor-sharp," one of the Marines mentioned, holding tightly to his pulse rifle. "Are you sure we are not walking into a trap, Mr. Jaeger?" "I am sure we need to maintain our courage and resolve," Glen coolly responded, trying to conceal his own fear. "Aye, Mr. Jaeger." All the Marines regained their game faces. Glen began to doubt his decision not to have had Captain Mahan and the full Marine squad accompany them. He realized it was too late for second-guessing. He was convinced, though, that if they did show a mere hint of fear before the Amphithars, it could have deadly consequences for them. Finally reaching the fountain in the center of the compound, the air became much more comfortable as the circulating fountain waters sapped the heat out of the air. The Amphithar they had passed to reach the fountain suddenly all dropped to one knee with a loud thump of their steel knee guards hitting the ground hard. In unison, the ranks of warriors turned their heads to face the four Earth men. Their helmets scraped lightly with their mail steel collars in one loud motion of metal against metal. Suddenly, without a cue, the ranks of kneeling soldiers, all as one, shouted "Dorwa." In unity, they all lowered their heads in respect to Glen and his Marine escort. Glen could not help to be emotionally moved by the sight of kneeling warriors before him. He began to understand the seduction this world must have had on Demi. Suddenly Glen felt delicate six-fingered hands wrap around his arms from behind as he observed the spectacle before him. Alien but lovely, the lily-white hands guided him and the Marines around to the other side of the fountain, where Glen was to confront the other seductive force of this alien moon of Smith III. Two scantily clad A-er-shwaaaa maidens had locked onto the arms of Glen and each of the Marines. They giggled and batted their long, seductive lashes at the Earth men as they led them to the main building of the compound. The doors opened, revealing a large hall with shafts of green and orange sunlight flooding the hall through large, tinted glass windows. At the other end of the large hall sat an A-er-shwaaaa male on a raised stage 3 steps up. Around him stood more A-er-shwaaaa maidens wearing nothing at all. "Well, it seems there are no carpets to match the drapes," the younger Marine stated as they all viewed for their first time completely nude A-er-shwaaaa females. "Well, if this is a trap, I am going to at least die happy," the older Marine said as he took turns smiling at both of the very attractive maidens on his arms. The maidens began making a very seductive, disarming cooing sound to the men as they drew them further inside the large hall. "Ask him if he is the regional overseer," Glen asked Stovall, ignoring the comments of the Marine and the cooing maidens on both his arms. Stovall took a couple steps forward, standing alongside Glen. Both men stood a few paces before the A-er-shwaaaa male on the throne chair before them. As they walked a bit closer to him, they stopped their approach when they realized the male was also completely nude. Stovall looked at Glen, surprised, before speaking to the nude A-er-shwaaaa male. A-er-shwaaaa. The male responded to Stovall's question as he stood before them, completely exposing himself. "Well, at least they don't seem to be much competition to us in that area." The younger Marine joked about the alien male. "He might be a grower," responded the older Marine. Stovall turned his head, giving the Marines a disapproving glance. "Sorry, Specialist." The Marines wiped the grins off their faces. The overseer descended to their level and knelt on one knee, lowered his head, and reached out towards them with open palms. All the females in the room did the same while cooing deeply.